evening to all our viewers joining us in Africa and around the world. This is Worldview live from our studio in Johannesburg, and I'm Yvonne Katsande. In today's topic of racism, South Africa is undoubtedly one of the most open societies in the world. So joining me tonight is a gentleman who is a social commentator here in South Africa, that is More Life Mapeture. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. But before we get into detail, here are some video clips captured in what racism has caused in some parts of South Africa and Africa at large. Let's have a look.
Hey, meneer Freud. You fucking hell. Kom. Ja, kom, ons wil die petrol gooi, man. Kom in. Bring sommer hy slang oor. Kom, pak uit. Weg. Ja, nou vroeg wala, man.
One is dead. This happens all the time. All the time. The judges are terrible. I'm so sick of it.
Her venom is redirected to police officers who've arrived to help. One of the policemen takes offense. His partner attempts to defuse the situation.
I understand how you feel. I'm not going to allow it to talk to us.
Every single person that answers the phone is a black person, and they are clueless.
His intervention proves fruitless.
If you people were trying to assist me, you would answer one of the 50 calls that I made. Listen, yeah, I'm not going to change my mind. I hate the bastards.
She refuses to back down, spewing further insults.
I can tell you now, the caliber of blacks in this town varies from the caliber of blacks in Germany.
Okay, man.
They're opinionated, they're arrogant, and they're just plain and simple useless. I'm happy for a white person to assist me, or a colored person, or an Indian person. I do not want a black person to assist me.
After the exchange, she prepares to leave.
If you people were
I'm trying to assist
Let me
you.
tell you something. This is the type of police force we've got. We've got low caliber people working.
You're telling me like caliber police officer.
If I see a person, I will drive him over. If I had a gun,
Ma'am, listen to me now one more time. I'm not going to say it again.
A bystander arrives. The officer explains what's happened.
When we stopped here, she insulted my colleagues. She called this constable a black. Okay?
no,
She
I
called this
didn't.
person.
I said I don't want to deal with any
Ma'am,
and I'm not prepared to deal with any I've just been smashed and grabbed.
you better tell her. If she doesn't want to get arrested, she must calm down.
ENCA is still trying to establish if police are investigating the incident. Desan Thathia, ENCA.
Well, those are just some of the few captured clips of what actually happens in everyday society with regards to racism. Now, would you actually acknowledge that there is a clear cut between black and white, not only in South Africa, but we're talking at Africa at large?
Okay, Yvonne, the issue of race relations is a very controversial issue. Most people, when they're talking about racism, they are referring from racism from the white people to the black people. But also there is a percentage of racism from the black person to the white people, which is actually happening. That's why you find out that when we are talking about the issue of land invasion, taking over things from the white people, you will notice that in a certain country, black people would always want to push the white people out, saying this is our land. But the fellow black people who came from other countries into a certain territory, they don't talk about them. There is that smooth ecosystem. Can we really say we no longer have white Africans? Yes, we
Well, that's a good question. Can we actually really say we no longer have white Africans?
No, we know we have got white Africans. People, we have got a very long generation who have been in Africa since 1890. Some of them, they don't know anyway outside Africa. So those people, can we really say they are still Caucasians, Europeans or something, or we'll call them Africans? They are now Africans. So when we are referring to racism, it's not fair just to say the white people, you've got racial tendencies of undermining blacks. No, let's be fair. Let's put everything on a flat table. Then we measure racial relations based on a fair system.
Okay, so Given the situation that we see actually in more in everyday society, it seems it tilts more to whites being racist more against the black people, which seems to have been the norm, be it in the workplace, be it in a school place, be it in just an ordinary society. The question of interest when doing my research on the streets of Johannesburg was, it seemed it leant more on backing date from apartheid. So can we say that apartheid has influence of racism that we see every day? Colonialism in general, does it link to the racism and the effects and the power of racism of white people over black people?
Yeah, true. Apartheid has got an upper hand on it. Look, I want to put two different countries into consideration at the moment in time. First, let me say charity begins at home. Whatever we tell our kids at home, they will grow up with that mentality up until they are mature people. If you look at an ordinary Zimbabwean, when he looks at a white person, he is seeing a co-worker, a fellow person on the right, they are on the same level. But some of the people in South Africa at the moment in time, they still think a white person is more superior than them.
Why is that though?
Just because it's something they were told when they were growing up, that this is my boss, this is my boss, this is my boss. And now they always think that a person who can employ you, a person who can give you guidance is a white person. No wonder why you see some fellow black people are still sending kids to African school where they are teaching in Afrikaans and there is no African language. You thank God to the South African educational system, which give them an order that at least there must be an African language in the studies. Otherwise, if it wasn't like that, there are some schools which were going to teach Afrikaans only.
In fact, that was one of my questions, within the program today, that why do we see that there's some races that want to somehow superimpose their languages on the more vulnerable races, but they never bother to actually learn their languages? A good example, Afrikaans, like you just said. And then in some other parts, it's other languages leaning more like the Chinese now, teaching their Mandarin language in Africa. But we've never heard of the Chinese learning any African language. Why is that, and what are the results of that influence?
It goes back to the issue that I said, charity begins at home. An American, it doesn't matter that an American is 12 years old. When he is around a number of nationals, that he feels like he's more superior than all of us. But
whether it's a black American or a white American.
Whether black American or white American, they always think that they are the best, they are the firstborn of the world. Because every time when they were born and they were growing up, their parents taught them that they are the superior nation, something like that. And it's also happening now with the Chinese. They think that since they are controlling the economy right now, they are the firstborn of the world, and wherever they go, they have to impose their language, they have to impose everything. It's funny. We really like Chinese in African countries, but funny enough, when they're coming to Africa, they bring everything. They don't even buy cooking oil, they don't buy salt, they don't buy everything.
They bring their
They
own
bring
supplies.
everything pre-packed from China, with salt, with cooking oil, with tomatoes, those noodles, something like that. And they also want to teach us Mandarin in our own country. And we are just taking it because we consider ourselves beggars, and yet we are the richest continent in the world. So it's something that we are teaching our kids, that inferiority complex within us, whereby we think everyone who's got a white skin is more superior than me, and he can think better than me.
Okay, now you see, the role of race itself has been perceived of what constitutes racism. Just the fact that we have different races in society. We have the Indians, we have the black man, we have the white man. That in it alone has been perceived as what actually constitutes racism, when now eventually we have one race feeling more superior than the other. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we bring society together to just realize that, in fact, if anything, there's only one race, and that is the human race?
African governments have to change their educational curriculum. Because when I was at school, I was taught about the European history, the World War I and the World War II. I was taught about the greatness of Mussolini, the greatness of King Leopold.
The greatness of the Nazi.
Yes, the partitioning of Africa, the civilization of Africa, meaning Africa was not civilized prior to white people coming to Africa. And yet we managed to build
Is
the
that
pyramids.
notion
We managed to
actually
build
really
the Great
true?
Zimbabwe, the Mapungubwe, before the white men came here. We managed to do that. So the African states must change the educational curriculum and start to teach us about our own African history, whereby we must zoom the greatness of King Chaka. We must zoom the greatness of King Munomutapa. We have to highlight their expertise. The Cow formation, it was high level of military thinking. He wasn't taught that by a white man. It was from his strategies. So let's highlight those things and let's not talk about George Washington and everything. I've never been to America and I don't desire to go to America. So why must I be bombarded with the George Washington
history
and the
and all
Roosevelt
that?
thing? And we are always told about what's his Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince what? What does that have to do with me? I'm an African. I don't want to go there. I've got everything in Africa. So why I must be taught about them? And why are you telling me that Chaka was an evil king who would bury live people? Why do you have to tell me that? Why don't you tell me about the greatness of Chaka? Why don't you tell me about the greatness of King Munomutapa in the Munomutapa kingdom? Why don't you highlight the goodness of our president, Jacob Zuma? Why don't you tell me about the greatness of Robert Mugabe? Why do you want to tell me about the good democratic values of those white people? No. So the African countries must change their educational curriculum, teach their kids about the goodness of our own forefathers. Yes, we want to deal with white people. Yes, international trade is good. We are now in a global village. But you cannot come to my home and tell me your house values into my own home. No, we can't do that. That's not fair. So we have got inferiority complex and we have to change that.
Okay, so what do you think? What do you make of the people who justify racism?
Any person who justifies racism is an evil person. He is more evil than Lucifer himself. Yeah. Because if God created people with different colors, it means he is so excited about them. So they're all equal. No one is better than the other. Yep.
Okay, now let's talk about racism in workplaces. Something that has actually caused some sort of an African continent world cry, where it seems like it is rather the situation. Black people, be it you're on the same platform or the same level of education with the next white colleague, black people are complaining that they are getting less salaries, you know, the worst treatment, and yet the white people seem to just have their privileges. I think the question of interest here would be, what would it take for the black person to actually wake up and smell the coffee and realize that they can actually do something about it? Does it really have to go on? Does it really have to stretch? Because there's a wide variety of examples of what racism is actually doing in everyday society. So how do you think we can start a step one going forward to say that perhaps this has to change now?
I'll still go back to my point. Charity begins at home. 2, change the educational curriculum. 3, you know, one funny thing about us black people is we lack order. We survive in chaotic situations. When there is a queue, we don't want to follow the queue. We always to cut corners. That's most of us blacks. And orderly people will take advantage of that. Right, if we are very orderly, we have to sit down, put our heads together, emancipate all our resources and trade them accordingly so that we'll become richer. At the moment in time, we are being controlled by people who were given scholarships by the so-called colonizers. And every time when they're sending us to their countries to learn using their money, will come with that mentality that these people are more organized. Because I'm being fed from them. That's why you find some of the political leaders, they form parties with the right principles of black emancipation. They are given money from all those international organizations outside of Africa. They will come back, they will change the original philosophies, they will change original ideologies, because now their bread is being battered from somewhere. They are now being given new directions. And you will see a very brilliant leader changing goalposts here and there, something like that. So what I'm trying to say is, we must stop these corrupt tendencies that we have. If I became the president, the next thing is my wife is the minister of sport, my young brother is the minister of transport, my cousin is the minister of education, my girlfriend is the minister of so and so. We are busy building a 156-roomed house, and yet I only have got 2 sons. Instead of putting all those things into national development, setting a platform for our future kids to step on, we are busy enjoying ourselves, creating a cloud for ourselves.
Okay.
That's the biggest problem.
I want to take a realistic example at this point in time, if you will allow me, of Zimbabwe. Right, we are talking about the influence of the white people in industries, in workplaces, in educational systems. Here's a model of an African country, that is Zimbabwe, that clearly does not stand from what we have seen for any white rule over its own native people. And that is something that the world has come to accept, and they know. But here's a situation where we had most white people being taken out of the country, and the country surviving with its own native people. How did that actually work for Zimbabwe as a country? And what are the advantages and the disadvantages, perhaps if I should say, of such a situation where we are literally not coexisting, but we are just having the natives of the country taking over the economy of the country, taking over the educational system of the country, taking over the running of the business of the country, literally everything?
Well, it comes back to the issue now of corruption. I really applaud the Zimbabwean government on a number of steps they had taken. Unfortunately, they are going on a downtrend in terms of economy due to some circumstances which I might say is out of their own, and some of them which is being controlled by the people who control the international markets and the international economies. All the white people who had some interest in Zimbabwe, they took out their interest out of Zimbabwe, and they are seeing the events in Zimbabwe from afar, but they are still interested in the politics of Zimbabwe. The reason why I'm saying so is every time when Zimbabwe is having elections, you see lots of inflow of white people coming to vote, then they move out 3 days after elections.
Is that correct? They actually come to vote in the
They
Zimbabwean
just come
elections
to
and
vote,
then they go?
then they go out of the country. You know, when Robert Mugabe inherited the economy of Zimbabwe, he took the economy which was modeled by Ian Smith after the I think it was in 1962, after Ian Smith declared the Unilateral Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
Ian Smith, there were sanctions upon Rhodesia. So Ian Smith had to model the economy in such a way that Rhodesian economy can be sustained by state companies with the help of apartheid South Africa and Portugal through Lourenço Marques, because they were still controlling Mozambique. And when he modeled that economy, when Mozambique got its independence, the economy of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, was being sustained by only South Africa and some sanction busting which was actually happening. Right. When Robert Mugabe inherited that economy, he managed that economy up to a certain stage, and it was happening quite well. Then the international community, sensing that this guy is now going to cause danger, they started giving us the new economic blueprints, like the ASAP, taking out the government subsidies from health department, from the educational department. Because I still remember around 1980 up to 1987, kids were going to school for free. But those guys, they started controlling, giving them the new economic blueprints, which made Zimbabwe to be where it is today.
Today, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to take this time to say to our viewers watching us from home that if you want to be part of the conversation, kindly call us on the numbers that are showing on the screens right now so that you can also participate in this interesting conversation. Now, let's take it away from Africa a little before I come back to actually show you some clips, more clips of what we have gathered of what is happening in the society, particularly in South Africa. Let's take it to the UK. What actually we saw happening soon after the Brexit vote. We saw the same thing happening after the US elections when President-elect Donald Trump won the elections. Well, I have a clip here on the UK Brexit vote and what possibly happened. Let's just have a look at that and hear some of the comments that is actually not only in Africa that we experience this, but it seems like a worldwide problem. Let's have a look.
The first word they were supposed to say hello, how are you? But they said you're not welcome to these neighbors, and you're not part of this community. So get out of our community. That's when it started. After a couple of hours later, there was a guy just knocking the door, trying to hit my little brother. He's 3 years old. All the neighbors came out, and they were supposed to tell him to get off our property, but they encouraged him to go inside our property. My mother was walking on the side of the road, the pavement, and there was a car on the road, and he came in on the pavement and started chasing her. They haven't came across something as horrible as that situation.
Yeah, for a Chinese news program.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
This area, that's where we'll find hotspots. So when they see these differences, have a hatred or have a instant dislike to these people because of their differences. And what we do is we'll attempt to move a BME family from this area to a diverse area, avoiding the problem.
Here and
Well, those were some of the reactions after the Brexit vote, with people clearly saying that they wanted the foreigners, the black people in particular, to be deported back into Africa. But before, okay, let's bring it back home. Let's have a look at what actually happened a few months ago at one of the high schools in South Africa with regards to the girls that were having challenges with their black hair and the white people's gold hair. So it was something that exploded into a racist rant. Let's also have a look at that.
A South African school was on Tuesday ordered to suspend alleged racist regulations after black pupils said they had been called monkeys by teachers for wearing band afros. Local education authorities in Gauteng province gave Pretoria High School for Girls 21 days to reassess its rules after protests by students triggered a public dispute over alleged racism. Speaking on the morning call, Gauteng's Department of Basic Education spokesperson Opa Bodibe said the protests were not just about hair.
Okay, so those are some of the things. The smallest things, I can't help to notice, but even the smallest of things are actually causing racist rants in Africa. Now, we're almost coming to the close of the show. What will be your remarks to people in Africa and the world at large, both black and white?
To the white people, first of all, in the world, if they want the black people to be deported, yes, with pleasure. We've got enough space for them in Africa. But on one condition, every white man must go back to his country. But which one? Which one? Because if your ancestors came to Africa in 1823, which country are you going to? So that's one thing which people must put into serious consideration. Then the issue about Africans. Africans, one, we need order. We must have order. Within our own black people, we must have order. Two, we must stop corruption. The corrupt tendencies is killing everything, and we are now blaming that these people are always looking down upon us because we are poor. We are always begging unto them. If everything is fine with me, I don't need Mr. Smith or Mr. White or Mr. Yellow. I don't need him because everything will be right at my house. I don't need anyone. So we must put order in our own house, and we must teach our children to have self-respect first. before they can pinpoint at someone that this person is not respecting me. If I don't need anything from your own home, I don't care whatever you say about me, because I am my own man. That's the thing about Africans. And two, stop this issue of teaching our kids about how great, what's his name?
Oliver Twist
was when we have our own heroes in Africa. Every year we celebrate the people who died in World War I, in World War II, and we don't celebrate people who died, our own black brothers who died during our wars of liberation. We don't celebrate that. So Africans, we must have self-respect. We must have order. We must stop corruption, build our economies, so that we must have my own More Life Foundation scholarship, which I will teach black people and white people the greatness of Africa. Something like that. We are not parasitic to another race. We must cohabitate. We must have a very good ecosystem, because all these other continents, they want resources in Africa, and we want technology from them. So let's be on a flat platform, exchange what we have. No one must look down upon me. Yes.
And coexist.
Yes.
Okay, well, we have come to the end of the program. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we can't really continue. But thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing your views and your thoughts on what racism is all about, not only in South Africa, but Africa at large, and even the world at large as well. Now, racism is not going to be overcome simply because people speak about it. Racism, like so many other ills of a society, is the product of a society built on colonialism and its apartheid derivative of the benefit of the tiny section of the population. Now, perhaps people must embark on a campaign to overcome racism. The socio-economic character of the society being constructed is based on the resolution of the historical injustice and the building of a democracy with social content. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you for watching, and do join me again next Thursday as I bring you more insight on the world's current and political affairs. Good evening.